All right. Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the Mindset Breakthrough Show. Today's guest is Ross O'Loughlin. Ross, we've been friends for just 8 years or so when we started copywriting together. He's now doing some incredible stuff over. He does this like open everyday program that's really good for getting off the launch cycle and having regular sales coming into your business all the time. And he's got some incredible results. He's got clients there, but we're here to talk about some therapy shit. So yeah, Ross went to. You also did some work with Brent Charlton, who I worked
Yeah.
with for pretty closely for about 2 years. And then I remember you had one breakthrough that we had talked about it before. It was kind of like this, like reeling, kind of earth-shattering thing that kind of like knocked you like off the ground for what seemed like a couple of days. And you just want to share that story?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, as a kind of like background, so I was working with Brent Charlton. Actually, going back a chapter even before that. So,
Sure.
like 2016, I was like in a year into my full-time freelance copywriting career, and that was going great. I'd like left engineering behind, and like even as I was transitioning from engineering to marketing, I had a load of like, you know, uh invisible beliefs, and we are also kind of have like, familiarity with one another because we're both kind of been through the Ramit Sethi kind of world. And like Ramit was like the first wake up call for me around this concept of what he calls like invisible scripts, right? Which are like, these scripts are things that like, have you limited in your beliefs about what is possible, what isn't possible. And as I was coming out of engineering into marketing, I was like, I had all these, limiting beliefs about what, like, I can't do this and I'm not trained. Like, engineers are very much like, if you're not trained in doing anything, you're not able to,
Yeah.
like, who the hell are you to be doing it, right? And so I
Where's
kind
your
of got
certification?
exactly right. And so I kind of got through a bunch of those limiting beliefs, but that was kind of my wake up call to even what these things were. None of this personal development stuff was kind of really anywhere near the mainstream in Ireland. And then in 2016, I was a year of my copywriting career and full time working freelance and everything. And then like a relationship broke down, and a primary relationship breaking out. It was like a 4.5 year relationship, which is a pretty long relationship. And that's like, you know, like most dudes who have that relationship fall apart in like your late 20s, early 30s. It's the all right, like, come to Jesus. What the fuck is going on in my life kind of moments where you're like self-reflecting. Not everyone does it, but it's an
Yeah.
opportunity to like be leveling up and moving on to another path. And that's really when I was deep in Copy Chief, when we like started to connect. And at that time, I kind of was talking with another colleague, friend of ours, Ian Stanley, and he introduced me to the book No More Mr. Nice Guy. And so No More Mr. Nice Guy is a book by a guy called Robert Glover, Dr. Robert Glover, which is about a thing called nice guy syndrome. Like, we all are familiar with the expression like nice guys finish last. And it really spoke to me because it was like basically explained all the reasons why the relationship fell apart. I had never been broken up with before in my life. It was the first time I was on the receiving end of that. And it was like, looking back, no wonder the person broke up with me. I was like a fucking disaster in a lot of ways, right? But the nice guy syndrome highlighted all the things that I had been doing like wrong.
Mhm.
What was really interesting was I started to work with Dr. Glover through his kind of group and whatnot. And actually,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I did it in like group sessions and all that. And a lot of it was good. But it wasn't, a lot of it was just highlighting the issues, but not getting to the bottom of things. Um, and then like there was something he mentioned about like inner child work or talking to your inner child. And those moments where like your attention just goes and you're like, what the fuck is that? You know what I mean?
Sure.
And it's
Yeah.
like, I had no idea that any of that stuff even exists. Like, I had heard about it in the past, you know what I mean? But I had never really like done any of it. Like, it was zero awareness. But like when he talked about it in that group, I was like, can you talk a little bit more about that? Like,
Yeah.
because my
That's
subconscious instantly knew, no, that's
this is significant.
this
Yeah.
is significant, and this is a thing you need to pay attention to. And like we kind of talked about it a little bit, but it didn't really go any deeper. Um, and then at the time there was like Ian Stanley, who's like partnered with Brent Charlton and worked with him on a bunch of stuff. He had started to work with Brent at that time, and he was like, "Bro, like this is the real shit." Do you know what I mean? Like this is the you gotta talk with Brent. And so I tried to talk with Brent I pinged Ian a number of times, and he said he would introduce me, but like busy dude, like million messages coming in, never got around to doing it. And it was actually right before we went to Colombia, right? We went down to Colombia with a bunch of copywriters, and we were down there in like the copywriting Colombian cartel house there for like 3 months. I was at traffic and conversion right before that. And that's when I pinned Ian down, and I was like, dude, like you need to like introduce me to Brent. And like I don't know what was going on with me. At the time I was feeling really shitty at traffic and funnels. Sorry, traffic and conversion. Looking back now, it's because I was getting totally triggered by a whole bunch of the like teenage shit that was happening there. But I didn't know why I was feeling really bad at traffic and conversion. But I pinned Ian down, and I was like, dude, can you just please shoot that introduction to Brent?
Yeah.
And like, I didn't know why I was doing it, but just part of me was like, you need to talk to this guy. Like had never spoken to him before, but I'd like the world was just telling me, and I just knew I need to talk with Brent.
Oh, I love that. I'll say that, not to interrupt you. I just love that.
Yeah.
Like the thing of like, I don't even know why exactly. It's just like this pull in this direction. That's so cool to like feel it. And then, just be following through on it.
Yeah, totally. And so it's kind of like, you know, that has happened a number of times in my life where I don't know why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
But I like, part of me is just like, it's just there's something. Like I'm an engineer, right? Like I don't believe in woo-woo shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not that I'm not don't believe in like the value of spirituality and all that, but like, you know, there is like these guiding forces. It's like, no, I don't believe in that. But I do believe in like your and subconscious like can steer you towards things that you should be steered towards. And like your rational, big thinking, smart brain on top that thinks it has it all figured out, you know, doesn't understand why it's happening. But if you're listening, like your subconscious usually tells you instinctually, like this is where you need to be going. And anytime I followed through on that, even though I had no idea where it was going to end up, like my life has usually gone on to like another level, right? Sometimes that's like writing something. Sometimes it's like just pinning down and making sure that you get a connection to someone, but like followed through on that. And then actually had the first conversation with Brent while we were down in Colombia. And it was really interesting. Like Brent he qualified me like a motherfucker on that call. Not from a sales perspective, because like he's not like, you meet Brent and you know Brent, he's not like a super slick sales guy, but he knows his own value. And he's like, you know, do I really want to be doing this work with you? Like, are you even ready? You know what I mean? Like all that stuff. And he was like feeling me out. And he was like, I think you are. And went to go meet him, and like signed up for some sessions and went down to do the intensive. And, you know, great sales job after you go through that intensive and you do the chair work and all that shit, which is just like, I don't know how much you've talked about that in the show.
I haven't talked about any of it yet.
Yeah. So, you know, like vulnerability time, like you go in and you talk with Brent, and you know, he's a master at what he does. And he's like talking about, you know, cool. So what's going on in your life? And like, where are the issues? And he explains his like core issues matrix. And like, it's a fire hose of kind of information into what's going on with you. And a lot of the wounds you're carrying in life, like you may be ignoring them, but you know what they fucking are. Like, you know, like you mightn't have articulated it. It might not have been talked about in public, but like, you know, basically the high level why you're kind of fucked up about right?
There's a part of you that knows why you're such a mess. Yeah.
But like, you know, for like, it always comes back to early childhood experiences. And like your parents are a certain way, and then like you don't know how to deal with that, and like you have no context for the rest of the world, and it's your entire reality, so you just assume this is how it is without realizing that your parents are like flawed individuals who were fucking you up in their own special way. And like you had childhood experiences where you were this person in this environment and you got treated by these other people this certain way. And then like you're just a child who does not have the ability to make sense of any of this, but you're just a basically walking, talking ball of defense mechanisms to kind of keep you struggling forward while you're like moving through life, right? Like that's basically what
A
we kind of
walking ball of defense mechanisms. That's amazing.
right, but like that's
Yeah.
a lot of what it is, and then you can add some polish and some presentation on the front of that, and like that's what your like persona and like ego shows up as. But like that's what a lot of us basically are. You know,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that at the time, but I was in the conversation with Brent, and then he's just basically like steering you into, you know, a bunch of the stuff that you haven't really dealt with before. And he's like, you know, taking you through his framework, which is about, you know, at a high level, there's like the wounded child. So you got hurt emotionally as a kid in one way or in a number of ways on a same theme. And then you have an adapted teen behavior. And then when you get triggered, what's happening is usually it's your wound that was there getting triggered. And then you're having a defense mechanism of your teenager coming in to like overcorrect or to defend and like keep your inner child kind of safe, right? Like that's the fundamental kind of explanation that Brent kind of talks about. And then he explains that this happens on like 4 different core issues, right? Like worth, safety, needs, and perfection. And, you know, a lot of us are kind of a bit, you know, more skewed towards being in a child state versus a teen state. And where we want to be is the third state, which is like the functional adult, which is kind of not operating from a place of being triggered. So he kind of explains all that to you. And then in the intensive, he's basically trying to get the teen out of the way so the child can come out and just say, this is all the stuff that I feel sad about. And then there's a lot of crying and there's a lot of, you know, admission. And then it's like, you know, okay, so we're now kind of letting this stuff out and we can start to process that and we can start to like heal. That's like the start of the process.
Yeah.
And then it kind of culminates in the, which is something called chair work, which I'd never fucking heard about this before. But like Brent is like, you know, people track me down for just this. And I very rarely do it, but you get it. And you only get it once. And like, I don't know how you would describe it. How would you describe the chair work? Like, it's
I
a
would
weird
describe it
experience.
as energy work or energy healing.
Yeah.
How's
Yeah.
that fit
Yeah.
with your
Yeah.
engineering
Like,
brain?
yeah, I suppose that's what it is. Like it's energy, like energy healing to an extent. Like how I kind of categorize it is, um, it's kind of you in the intensive first get in touch with your child and teen on that level because like they've been there the whole time, right? And we all have these voices in our head, and like we all have to admit that there's more than one voice in our head, right? Like there's sometimes there's conversations going on and we think it's
Yeah.
totally normal. It's totally fucking weird, right? And like Brent explains that, like, well, these are actually multiple ego states, and there's a child and there's a teen state, and sometimes you're talking as your child, and sometimes you're talking as your teen, and you know his process is about understanding well which voice is which, and use boundaries to make sure that like you don't let your teen and child to start like slipping out in inappropriate moments, and
Yeah.
then consider what you're saying and speak from an adult position. That's a big part of it. But the big issue that he kind of gets you going is like, these are the voices. And then he kind of introduces you to them. And then the chair work is very much like you've made a list of all of the kind of ways that you were kind of hurt so that you can think of between like, you know, your pain that you had with your parents when you were growing up or whatever it was. And then there's kind of a therapeutic getting it all out. And he kind of puts you into this meditative state where you start to like visualize your parents, and then like it gets freaky. You know what I mean? Like you were like, I don't know about you, but I was like wailing like a fucking child. And like a lot of it is just like processing of that pent up emotion that would have been bottled before. And it's like it's getting it out, right? It's that therapeutic release of the emotion, which for particularly for young boys, like you're told like don't be angry,
Yeah.
don't be sad, like stop crying, you know what I mean? And like you're trained just to stuff those emotions, and when you don't let them process, like they get stuck, as Brent would say, right? And so the chair work is like the starting portion of like how you get that emotion out. And Brent was saying, like, you know, you only experience this once, like, and you'll never experience anything like it again, was how he kind of framed it. And he was true. He was telling the truth at that point. Like, I had gone through that process, and then the rest of the work with Brent over the next like 2 and 3 years for me, you do corrections and whatnot. And none of it ever came anywhere close to that kind of like emotional release.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. And so all this is like the primer to your original question. And I think for like to get to that big breakthrough, like it was like it was a correction work kind of breakthrough. And so like, have you talked about corrections on here? Like, how do you kind of describe and talk about corrections?
No, I haven't talked about it.
Yeah. So how would you describe corrections? What am I just waffling on? How would you kind of describe corrections? And
I would call it like having a conversation with your inner child or inner teenager about the things that bother them and trigger them, and doing it in a way so that triggering basically goes way down and becomes manageable, or might just disappear altogether.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. So like the big thing that initially attracted me to like Brent was how Ian described the work he does, which is once you get to like a certain technical skill set in life, it's not your ability that holds you back, right? It's often your emotional blocks and patterns that stop you from taking action on the things that you know would move you to the next level, right?
Yeah.
And so we all kind of bump into the same shit over and over.
Yeah, you don't need to get better at writing headlines. Like, you're good. It's just your own belief in yourself and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, oh, that's totally true. I could see that for myself. And so the correction work in my mind is like you experience all this triggering day to day, and I like triggering is like that sharp emotion. Like I didn't have a definition for triggering. It was kind of like spoken about in the world, but it's like you can feel emotions at different levels. Excuse me, but when it's sharp and it's like, you know, intense, like that was the triggering.
Yeah.
And like you want to look at that triggering and then analyze like, okay, well, how did that happen? Because usually there's a thought and then the emotion comes after the thought as a reaction. And so the thought is usually what one of your, you know, child or teen is experiencing or thinking. And then that emotional trigger happens. And then once that happens, you're in a weird state. You're basically acting like a child or teenager at that point. And that's no way to be behaving if you're trying to like build a business.
Tough on relationships and running a business. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Like you shouldn't be talking to your partner at all when you've been triggered, because like you're basically behaving like a child or teenager. You know what I mean? Yep. And so the triggering is about capturing, or the corrections is about capturing that, understanding it, from a perspective of, well, what are they thinking? Have a conversation with the inner child or teen to understand, why do they think that? Like, what makes them think that? And then understand, like, where did they learn that in your past, right? Like something happened in the past that makes them fall into this thinking pattern. And usually there are emotions that are tied to it. And then the corrections about like, hey, I know you think this because you really think this, and this makes you feel this, right? And it makes sense that that happens because here's the story. Let me explain the story to you. And then let me explain how this is affecting you in real life, right? Like, here's why you're not answering the emails from clients, right? Here's why you're da-da-da-da-da. And then it's about like correcting it, which I think, was it Brent was saying or something? Like, it's about reparenting the child. Yeah. It's like giving them another set of wisdom and a different way to think, so that when the circumstance or situation resurfaces, they don't fall into that old thinking pattern and you don't get triggered. That's basically like the pattern of doing a correction, right? And it's crazy. Like this sounds all totally woo. And I was like, what the fuck? And then you do them, and then it's like nothing really happens right after you've done the correction. Like you do the correction, you meditate, you visualize your child, and then you read the correction, you repeat the correction to the child. And then you might get like a little sensation of relief, and you might have a little tiny like conversation with them back and forth. And then it kind of comes and you're like, okay, well, we'll see if that did anything. And then the weirdest thing happens where you find yourself in that situation and nothing happens. And then you don't realize it till afterwards. You're like, oh shit, I normally would have freaked out there a
Yeah,
little
I would
bit,
have
but
been
that
so
didn't
scared
happen.
or whatever. Yeah. And then you're just
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, that's like the pattern I was going through when I was doing the corrections with Brent, like for about 2 years. I was seeing great movement and a lot of progress. And then Brent and like the time I was working with him kind of came to an end, and he was like, don't worry, young Padawan, you have all the skills, you know how to do this. Like, just keep on the work. You don't need me. That's one of his big philosophies is like therapists, coaches should not be making you codependent on them. They should be making you independent so that you
Yeah.
have what you need to take the framework and do the work yourself. And what was really interesting was I was very codependent on Brent up to that point because I was waiting for him to do the corrections with me because I didn't want to fuck him up.
Yeah.
And then when he was gone, I was like, okay, well, now I have to kind of make this work myself. And the strangest thing started to happen was I started to do them, I would say, way, way better. Or like because I was self-guiding, like not that I like, not to say that Brent was interfering or doing them wrong. It's just once I started to like internalize and start to really look at my own cues and shit, I think I just started to really zero in on the stuff more regularly.
Cool.
And at the same time, like you've gone through a bunch of these corrections yourself, and like a lot of the same patterns start to come up. Like in the first 3 or 4 corrections, you're like, I have no idea why this happened. Like, what was the incident? And then after like your 10th correction, it's like, oh, this is about my mother not wanting to play with me when, I was 5 because she was a busy professional who worked from home and would constantly shut the door in my face when she was with a client. So, you know what I mean? Like, this is that thing again. It's just coming up in another way, right? And what was interesting was I'd started to do these corrections, and the crazy part was I did one correction and it was about exactly like that thing, but I kind of really zeroed in on like it specifically in a way where like really hit the nail on the head, and also kind of told my child like it was really wrong what she did. And I love my mother, right? Nothing wrong, right? But like Brent really tells you when you're talking to the inner child, which is really the wound that you want to heal, right? Like you get the teen out of the way so you can talk to the inner child and like have them not get triggered, because if they're not triggered, then the teen's not going to come in to try and correct.
Yeah.
And Brent says like you want them to like feel that it was really wrong what happened, it should not have happened, and that you're there for them now. They can now come to you instead of wanting to go to the parent that hurt them.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like really drove into that. And bro, the reaction I had was crazy. Like right after I did the correction, like I got this insane sense of like relief from like my belly up. I was like, whoa, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And like in the next day or 2, like I got a crazy pain in my chest and thought I was having like a heart attack, right? And then had like these waves of anxiety flowing over me, and I was like freaking the fuck out. And I like went to the hospital. I thought I'm actually having a fucking heart attack right now, right? Like I got a pain in my chest, and then I'm like having this like panic attack, and I'm going to the hospital, and like I had been through panic response training, so I'm like stopping on the street, going, "Yo, I don't know if I'm having a heart attack. Can you walk with me to the hospital?" Because like you hear these stories, right, of people who fall on the street and they're kind of people think they're drunk or high and they just like walk over them. So I was like, "Can you like please walk with me to the hospital? I don't know what the fuck is going on." And then I get there and the doctor's like, "You're not fucking having a heart attack, you fucking idiot." Right? Like, and I'm like,
"You're overcoming emotional trauma, duh."
Yeah, right. But like but the doctors had no idea. We have no idea what this is. Like clearly they came in and like I sat down and they took my heartbeat, and they're like, my heartbeat was going like, I don't know what it was, 140. It was like really fucking high.
Yeah.
And as soon as they took my heartbeat, they're like, oh shit, get him inside. Like they skipped me to the front of triage and they like put me on the EKG and like all this shit. And then it was like, no, there's nothing wrong with your heart. You're just having a panic attack. Panic attack is the wrong term. Panic attack is a very specific medical term. I was having an anxiety episode essentially, but I was panicking essentially, right? Just to be clear, because I know people have panic attacks and it's something very different.
Yeah.
Like I had one of those and nothing since, right? And then, man, like over the next like 3-4 weeks, like I spoke with Brent. I was like, bro, I don't know what happened. I ended up in the hospital. And like, here's what's happening now. I could like, I was like randomly wailing every now and again. Like, "Ooh." And he was like, oh, so what you've done, he described is like, you corrected your original wound is what he calls it, which is like the first wound all the way down at the bottom that like on which are all the other defense mechanisms were kind of stacked. Um, and it was like a wild experience. He gave me some like, you know, other additional exercises to do and ways to like engage with the child and really help them through it. And like I repeated that correction like 10 times over to them. But at that point, like I had a massive breakthrough where I could really start having like actual conversations with my child and my teen. Like I instantly could talk to them and like could hear them, which
Yeah.
again makes me sound like I'm fucking crazy. But like it took my ability to be able to talk to them to this weird next level. And since then, like anytime I'm doing corrections, like I will have an emotional response similar to what happened in the chair work. You know what I mean?
Oh
Where like
wow.
I'll do the correction. Like the chair work is kind of an extended one, but like I'll do the correction, I'll talk to the child, and then I think I turn into a fucking crazy person. Honestly, it's like, you know, do the correction, and then like all of a sudden, you know, 3 hours later, I feel really sad, and then it's like, oh, my child is now coming to me to process that emotion that we just spoke about in the correction. And I literally turn into like a childlike state. And there's like this weird old dusty emotion that was stuffed from years ago that just is like coming out. And they're like talking to me about how it wasn't fair about that thing happened. And like they tried or whatever the circumstance was.
Yep.
And then it happens for like 20-25 minutes. I'm just like in that, you know, really fucking angry state if there was an anger emotion, or like, you know, pain state and crying if that was the main emotion that felt. And then it's over. And I'm like, you come back to reality and I'm like, what the fuck was that? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and Brent goes, because I was saying, it's like, Brent, I think I'm crazy. And he's like, no, the reason you know you're not crazy is because when it's happening, you say to myself, I think I'm crazy. So like, that's how you know
Yeah.
you're not crazy, right?
Nice.
so that was kind of like the experience. And now, like, if you know I do a correction, there's like a 50% chance that if it's a particularly like tight or deep emotional one, like that same response happens. It doesn't happen all the time, but like if that happens, I get the sense that like that's been reduced
Yeah.
like 80-90%. And so yeah, that's kind of where we kind of ended up on with that kind of breakthrough. So long-winded question answer period there for that one breakthrough.
It's a lot. This
Yeah.
yeah, working with Brent is not a superficial light thing.
No.
Yeah, so and what about like what are some of the results that have happened? Like what are the behavior changes, the things that like
Yeah.
the ways you show up differently? Like I remember at one point you talked about like your writing was just like suddenly different. What are
Well,
some things
yeah,
that
like yeah, a couple of things. So one, like when I did the initial round of corrections, you know, was my writing different? I don't think so. I don't know, but I certainly was getting feedback from other people that
mm,
like your writing feels different.
mm,
Your writing feels like they didn't really describe it as like this seems more, I don't know, like solid, like you're just feel like you're coming out stronger. And like I think probably if I was to deduce what happened, it was yeah, I was probably less triggered about being judged with it and just being willing to just like say what I think in that sense.
yeah.
Um there's certain people I just stopped hanging around with because I'm like, oh, I don't really need like I was probably hanging around with them because I wanted their validation to some extent. I've definitely seen that pattern from like a business perspective as well. Um decided to like end a number of like relationships that were very lucrative, but were like clearly, again, I was just realized I was in them for the wrong reasons. Um, and all of this is good stuff because it's kind of allowed me to figure out, well, what the hell do I really want? Interestingly enough, like in a high end coaching group, it was quite expensive. Um, and I was in there for like a year and like getting some results, but really not like showing up, which is strange for me because
Mm,
like usually when I'm going into some like community or membership, like my big life lesson is show up, be super generous, like contribute a lot. And like, I'm usually like one of the top performers in whoever like owns that group. And this was the first time that didn't happen. But it was because I was kind of leveling up and I was going into like a higher level group that I wasn't like when you're going to that level, like everyone's kind of a winner. Do you know what I mean? And so now you're like not competing, but it's kind of like the same thing that happened to me when I was like leaving high school basketball. I was like MVP. I was like, you know, the rock star. I was like number one player, top scorer. And then you go to university, and who's on the university teams? It's all the other Rosses from their schools. And all of a sudden, like, you're not exactly the same hot shit that you were. Like, there's a ton of other people there who are as good as or even better than you were. And that was really interesting because what I noticed was I was not showing up in that group, and the script that was going on in my head was like, yo, I'm supposed to know this stuff. Why am I paying all this money to like be in this marketing group when like I'm supposed to be the marketing guy? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And really interesting, like that correction was related to like me being an older brother and being told like you're supposed to know better.
Wow. That's cool.
Right? Yeah, like don't get your like, why are you leading your little brother astray? Like you're supposed to know better. Like I didn't having that connected to marketing. And once I corrected that, like started showing up in the groups a ton. Right.
Nice.
And then got through to like going all in on coaching and going full-time on coaching. As soon as I made that decision, a bunch of other stuff came up and I was like not making progress and banging my head against the wall. And then, yeah, a bunch of realized another round of corrections had to be done. And that was related to like, well, didn't actually believe that I was going to be able to make it work. I didn't believe I could help the people that I wanted to help, which was daft because I would just look at my track record, you know what I mean? And like, look at all the results and case studies I've gotten. I'm like, my adult would say, bro, like, what are you talking about? You've been able to help so many people.
Yeah.
But that's like, if your inner child or teen is not feeling that, like, when you get triggered by this shit, that's the way that goes. So yeah, it's like corrected that, and then all of a sudden I'm showing up in the business and, you know, getting more, I would say, ambitious with like who I want to be helping and like bringing them in and having conversations with them. So those would be, I think, some of the more practical examples. Like obviously, you know, the life and business and relationships I've got have changed a lot. But those are some of the ways I think where, you know, some people might go into a group and think, oh, this isn't working. I'm not showing up. This isn't for me. Like I've now taken it upon myself to say, no, I'm going in here. I'm going to go and I'm going to try and do this thing. And then I'm going to use that as the opportunity to bump into all the shit that needs to be corrected. And it's going to tell me, this environment's going to tell me what I need, assuming I've selected the right environment and it's not a manipulative, psychopathic, you know, group, which is sometimes pretty
It can happen.
online. It can happen online, right? But if you show up in the right place with people who've succeeded and the system clearly works and the person got a good track record and they've built a good team, like if you show up in that environment, like you should be able to make it work. But if you're not, then it's, you know, you're the problem. It's kind of my perspective on it. So I was going to say, going to get in here and it's just going to tell me what I need to work on. And that's kind of where we're at in the journey kind of right now, right? Is like moving on to building out that coaching business and seeing what has to happen to get there.
Cool. Yeah. And that's awesome. And I love how that kind of ties back to like how it all started with like the, the Glover book and like, No More Mr. Nice Guy and like limiting beliefs there. And then kind of like, going through like, not just triggering, but then, this like new set of kind of like limiting beliefs that happened that you became aware of by joining this higher level coaching group with a bunch of like superstars and seeing this, like a whole new layer of things to work through. But both like mentally and with your business. That's super cool that you kind of kept seeing like new things to work on and improve to keep you moving up.
Totally. And that's it. It's like, it's identity and belief. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's for a lot. Like I see it in that group and in other places. I'm like looking back now at who's made it and who hasn't, right? We've all been in these programs or like on these journeys and like seeing like the people that made it through certain levels and people who like, you know, were in that group and never showed up or never figured out how to like show up properly or whatever. And a lot of it is like, it wasn't that the system didn't work, because clearly it worked if it worked for you and other people were successful, you know. Some people just don't understand how their own identity or their own belief in their ability to do it, like, really impacts how they take action. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you see people wash out, and it's like, well, that person had all the, they had all the skills, they had all the abilities, like, they should have been able to make it. Why didn't they? And like, you hear and see that story like across every field, you know. Music producers, you know, athletic combat or combat athletics, you know what I mean? Like, you know, the guy who's amazing in the gym, but then as soon as it comes time to like perform and compete, like, just falls to crap.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of it has to do with that identity and belief in yourself, you know.
Yeah, like identity and belief and willingness to kind of pursue and keep going, even when that belief isn't totally there. Because a lot of
Yes.
times it is the taking action, and like that's going to help build the identity and beliefs. Like, you know,
Yes.
you've got to just kind of do the things, acknowledge what you're doing and the wins you're getting along the way to help create that identity, build the beliefs versus the like, well, I'm just going to wait until I'm more confident and then I'll do it. It's like,
Yes. You're totally right. And I think that's exactly what it is, right? Because you have to go up through the levels, and you can't just like be, well, I'm gonna be Elon Musk and I'm just gonna have the identity and whatnot, right? Like, you have to like ratchet up the levels bit by bit, and totally, like, you have to like I won't say fake it till you make it, but it's like, put yourself in the environment to get the experience and data for how you don't currently believe this is true for you, so that you can like make those adjustments and give yourself some reference experience, and then, like, you know, work through issues. Like, that's not as obviously as snappy as fake it till you make it, but a little more accurate, you know what I mean? Is the
yeah,
sense of like, you gotta be at the level to understand why you feel like you don't belong at that level, and give yourself a chance. You got to persist and like believe that you can make it, and then just like, you know, work through the stuff, you know.
yeah,
Um, it's why I think there's people, you know, like Conor McGregor, who say, you know, that irrational confidence, you know, is one of the key reasons
yeah,
why they're so successful, you know.
totally.
Um, I, and that always like baffled me. It was like, how could you be so confident that you belong at the top when you have no evidence for that? And of course,
Yeah.
that's my
It's like, well, I know
engineering
I'm
brain
gonna prove
speaking.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so, um, but that's totally it. Yeah, that persistence, and then the persistence allows you to like, you know, build a belief and like form your identity that you are able to do the thing, and you are
Okay.
the type of person who's, you know, able to do it.
Cool. Yeah. And people who are watching who want more Ross O'Loughlin in their world, where do they go?
You go to conversionengineering.co. Yeah, that'd be the best place to see me. If you want to learn about what I do, you can also go to openeveryday book.com. That'll get you on the kind of copy of the book about what I do, which is like how to sell education programs without like relying on the launch model. So if that's interesting to you, you can opt in there and you can get on the email list, and that's where you will probably hear and see most from me.
Yeah, can't recommend Ross's stuff enough. I was in his program for a bit, used his stuff for myself and my clients, and it was wonderful. Everything he does is very smart and works really well. Yeah, is there anything else you want to share about the journey and all that Brent stuff, or anything else before we go?
No, I think that's good. Like, that was pretty deep. I think we
Yeah,
went
that was a
into
thorough
there.
understanding. Yeah, this is my
Uh,
first Brent episode. I'm sure there's going to be plenty more.
Yeah, yeah, you should
But
probably get
yeah.
Brent on here, right? That'd probably be a good one. Good conversation.
I'll send him an email. He'll check it in 10
Yeah.
years. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. And
Awesome.
if you like more episodes, head to mccarthymindsetcoaching.com/join, hop on the email list. We got more of these coming. And yeah, that's all. All right. Thanks again.
Amazing.
Have
Cheers,
a good
Brent.
day. Bye.